Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening.
Are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast. Now in this episode, we've decided to bless your feeds with a podcast replay. We've identified the most popular and most listened to episodes of the Deal Room Podcast and we have them running through your audio waves again. So this is a fabulous story of Mike Davis's zero to hero story that has a number of key takeaways. And I think it's really useful listening, whether you're just starting out in business, whether you're gearing up for sale one day, whether you're in the middle of growth, whether you're looking at bringing on board partners and other equity holders into the business, because boy, do we drill into that in quite a bit of detail. Or indeed, if you're at the point of exit. Now, in this episode, part one, we dig into Mike's formative years in the business to understand how to deal with growth, leadership, and management. We also talk about the consequences of not having a shareholders agreement, and we discuss how you can achieve success when entering into an earnout. So buckle in, and here we go with our episode with Mike. Mike, I just want to say a massive thank you for coming on today to the Deal Room Podcast. I am so grateful for you giving up your time.
Pleasure to be here.
Great, Mike. Well, look, I think probably the best place for us to start, and there's so many things that I want to traverse today. I want to understand your feelings about the sale process and you know, what you wish you had have known in advance and, you know, all of those things so that we can talk to our audience about what it feels like when they're at exit. But I'd like to start maybe back a little bit. Maybe if you can take us through a little bit of the history of your business. Let's start there, Mike.
Well, really, the history started way back when I was about 16.
Wow.
And I completed an electrical apprenticeship in a company in Wollongong in New South Wales.
Yeah.
Which was involved in the repair of electric motors.
Yep.
And I spent 5 years as an apprentice and they burnt me out.
Right. So you're a burnt out. You said you started at 16 and,
yes.
and you worked for 5 years. So by 21, that's it. You were burnt out and ready for retirement. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, well, I was burnt out and ready to leave that trade. And I enlisted in the RAAF.
Yep.
And
wow.
I actually learnt in the RAAF the importance of discipline around engineering and how you conducted yourself.
Yeah, right.
And problem solving.
Yeah, right.
And after 3 years and the arrival of Gough Whitlam, he gave us opportunity to exit the RAAF, which I did.
Right.
I call those my formative years.
Your formative years. Okay. I love it. And I guess, you know, it is the case. I speak to lots of business owners that have, you know, run very successful businesses. And quite often there is this, for everyone, there's this period of training where you do all sorts of different things, but all of those different elements arm you in perhaps many different ways for that evolution of being able, to build your own business in that space. Yes. And what did you, so looking back on those years from that perspective, what were the things that you got out of those early 10-year period that, you know, really set you up for future business ownership, entrepreneurship?
Well, I think it was in my DNA because my dad insisted that all his sons did a trade.
Right. Got it. Uh-huh.
And there I was with this qualification, but there was a major interruption in my life when I was around 25. I got married.
Right. I'm sure your wife didn't mind. Reference is an interruption.
Well, my wife was a medical practitioner, so I became second string to relationship.
Right, got it.
And I had to go and get a real job.
Right. And so where did you go then?
I went to university, studied education and went teaching.
Right.
And taught maths and physics in Australia and New Zealand for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then we landed back in this lovely place called the Hunter Valley,
Oh,
Newcastle. And I didn't have a job. I had a pregnant wife. We didn't have a house at that stage. And I made an announcement one day that I was going to go back to where I started.
Mm-hmm.
And I established a company repairing electric motors.
Oh, wow. And what year was this, Mike?
This is 1981.
1981. And so this is when the business was born.
Yes, this is when the real journey started.
Yeah, yeah. And do you remember some of those struggles when you're first starting the business?
Vividly. I remember imposters out in the community that I was dealing with.
Right.
Who suggested you weren't good enough, you haven't been in business long enough to do our work, we can't entrust you to it.
Yeah.
And I remember the bank manager going to the bank and saying I needed a loan to buy some stock for this business.
Mm.
And I walked out of the bank with a $2,000 bank card.
Wow. So that was the only finance that they had to offer you at the time, a $2,000 bank card.
I had to finance it out of savings and cash flow.
Yeah.
But it's actually interesting in business when you're a sole trader at that stage, which I was, you can use those negatives to motivate yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I had huge motivation from that. I had the energy.
Yeah.
And you needed it because I had to get up at 4 a.m. in the morning and do invoicing.
Wow.
Because I needed the daylight to do the work.
Yeah, yeah.
I fed and energised myself off the negatives to turn them into the positive. And the major positive I had was, I'm going to show them.
Yeah, right. I love that.
I'm going to make this work.
Yeah.
And I did. We took that business within 10 years from one guy to 50 employees.
Wow.
To Australian Small Business of the Year.
Wow.
To our business recognised in the Federal Parliament by winning an Australian Quality Award. And that's where the RAAF discipline came in. I structured the discipline shop. And bear in mind, this industry I was in, it was a cottage industry, essentially run by artisans. They weren't real business peoples or corporations in beside these type of companies at that time. And so I had a recipe there and we were famous, but, you had burnout. There's only a limit to what a human can do.
Oh, of course, absolutely. And look, that's huge growth from 1 to 50 employees. And there's a massive mindset shift that has to happen there along the way because, clearly as the one, you were doing everything. As you said, you were getting up at 4 a.m. and invoicing. And then, along the way to 50, generally what happens is you go from doing the work to being the manager to then ultimately stepping back and working out, how to find managers to manage. So can you tell me a little bit about that process and how you navigated understanding how to deal with growth, to deal with leadership and management?
Well, that was difficulty because with 50 people, you can't be a sole trader. You've got to be a team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've got to be able to choose the right people.
Yeah.
And on a technical level, I was fine with that. And on a sales level, because essentially I took a role of being the salesperson and the evangelist for the business. But on the commercial side, we always floundered a little.
Yeah, right.
And that's where I was at a crossroads. Do I employ an accountant?
Yeah.
And I spoke this over with my accountant who we had at that time. And he said, no, I'll buy into the business.
Oh, right. Wow. Okay.
And the accountant bought into the business, but that changed the chemistry of the business.
Right. In what way? And so until that point, until the accountant bought in, it had been you holding all of the equity and making all the major decisions in the business.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. And he made decisions, but for staff, it wasn't the same. And he brought a level of accountability.
He brought accountability. Got it. It wasn't the same
sort of from a positive perspective, as in he brought a better level of accountability. Is that what you mean?
He brought a level of accountability. I wouldn't want to put an adjective anywhere there.
And tell me, where do we move from percentage? So you owned 100%, and then what percentage did the accountant own as he came in?
30%.
30%. Okay, got it. All right. Okay. And how did that feel moving from, and sorry, how many years into the business was that?
10 years.
10 years. Okay. And I know, you know, many business owners who will run the race of growth on their own for many years and then get either the business gets to a particular size where they feel they need other people around to share some of this responsibility, or perhaps provide, you know, cash flow for the business, or whatever the reasons are for bringing on partners, or that they need an extra skill set. But often the reality of partnerships is different than the idea behind them. And, you know, sometimes that can be really hard when you've run your own race for such a long period of time, that decade. What was that like for you?
It was hard.
Yeah.
For a start, surrendering equity in the early days was based on a good feeling.
Yeah.
I sat back and felt, this is fantastic. I'm going to get all this opportunity and help in the business now. We're just going to go to the stars with this business.
Yeah.
And in reality, it actually put a glass ceiling on where we went.
Really? And why? Talk through that.
But we became so inwardly looking around the processes that were being developed,
right,
that we forgot who funds the business. It's not the owner, it's the customers who fund the business.
Yeah, right. Okay. So I guess you would say then that partly that decision about bringing in equity partners, you have to be really clear about what you want that focus in the business to be and to drive who it is that you bring on board. Because in this sense, you brought on board someone who was, I'm presuming because they're an accountant, there's someone who was good at looking at figures and, you know, looking at that side of things. And is that what you wanted from him? Like, what was the...
Yeah, I wanted to get up at 6 a.m, not 4 a.m. invoicing.
But presumably you already had staff by this point, is that right? So at the 10 years, how large were you at that point?
In terms of revenue?
Well, in terms of, I guess, staff. Employees. You were at 50 staff at that point. Yeah. Right, got it, okay.
All right. So there was significant worry about having that level of staff, meeting payroll each week, collecting cash and all those everyday things. And on top of that, being a technical guy, being involved in the technical operations of the business. And it wasn't something that I was prepared to give away and dilute any of the quality of what went out the door.
Yeah.
Because some of these machines we were working on could break the business if we got it wrong.
Yeah. And how did you navigate at that point, you know, the idea of how this would work together? Did you sit down and create a bit of a game plan of, you know, what happens if we don't agree? Who's going to make decisions about each of these areas? How might we exit if one person, you know, doesn't agree with the other?
There was no business plan.
Yeah.
And there was no shareholders agreement.
Yeah. And that's so common, isn't it? It's just so common, Mike. It is absolutely, you know, massively common. I actually held a webinar on this very topic quite recently, and more than 80% of people who are attending didn't have a shareholders agreement in their business. In fact, I've run a number of them. Some of the webinars have better figures than others, but it's indicative of the fact that it's a reality that I think certainly probably fair to say majority of businesses either don't have any shareholders agreement, or B, don't have sort of a comprehensive, you know, fit for purpose shareholders agreement for where they are right now. And I have lots of ideas about why I think that's the case, but maybe can you just tell me, reflecting back, you know, why is it that you don't have a shareholders agreement? And I ask this on the basis that I think it's useful to be able to reflect back, because whatever the reasons are were for you then, are the exact reasons why many of the businesses who'll be listening in today haven't got one in place at the moment. So, you know, it's great to reflect.
Well, when we seek that sort of participation, expand, get rid of equity and bring partners in, it's generally done on a bottle of red wine and dinner.
I'm going to say that's a more unique answer than I've had in the past. I love it, of course.
You know, it's feeling, it's emotive.
Yeah, it's probably the emotion in reality, isn't it? It's that feeling of trust and, you know, the belief in a future vision together, and perhaps not the time to sit down and unpick, you know, what the detail is behind that. And perhaps sometimes from a fear that it will create disagreement right from the beginning, maybe. Well, I don't know.
It's probably best in hindsight to have the disagreement at the beginning.
Oh, 100%, Mike. Yes.
So that you can actually fashion your shareholder agreement to accommodate it in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're happy to talk about it and, you know, don't if you don't want to, but if you're happy to reflect on the consequences of not having a shareholders agreement, what would you say they are?
Well, that came home to me later on when we did have a shareholders agreement, but we'll talk about then the fact that the fact that you don't have a shareholders agreement leaves you exposed.
Yeah.
It leads, there's no rules in place, there's no boundaries in place, and there's no recipe if it turns to cheese the whole deal, how you exit and how it happens.
Yeah.
And that happened to me in my first business. That award-winning company had a very ordinary breakup with the partnership and an exit.
Did it? And what happened there? Talk us through what happened.
There was a third investor brought in to prop cash up in the business because of this glass ceiling and this failure to growth, but a very high cost structure sitting underneath it. We were profitable, but we weren't profitable enough.
Right.
You know, profitable to meet probably the needs of a sole trader, but not a company running 50 staff and having corporate clients across Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah.
So,
and that must have been disappointing given you brought an accountant on board.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So we sought trade sales and we eventually sold the company and probably undersold the company.
Right.
To a listed Singaporean company.
Right. So I didn't know this element. Right. Okay. So you'd had this original sale. And when was that? What year was that you sold?
That was 1997.
1997. So at that point, you'd had the business for 16 years?
16 years, yes.
16 years. Okay. So 10 years on your own, 6 with a business partner at play, these issues appearing. And by the time you sold it, you had the third business partner as well, it sounds like. So you had the three of you.
Yeah, there was a silent partner, who was there.
Great.
And we sold that business off to the listed Singaporean company. And I stayed on to work out my non-compete.
Yep.
And I felt like Job on the ash heap for 3 years.
Right. And I want to talk about that because that's a super common feeling. So can you dig into that a little bit more? Why did you feel like that? What happened? Take us back to what you're feeling then and why it all changed for you so much.
Well, listed Singaporean-based companies really don't care how you do it, quite frankly, as long as the cash flows in.
Yeah.
So there was huge pressure to get cash in every month.
And were you on an earn-out at that point? Were you?
Yeah. Well, I sold my component of the shareholders for cash and script.
Right. I see.
So I had script in the company. I still have script in that company.
Right.
Today, because it cost me more to cash it at the moment.
Right. Okay. All right. So on reflection, maybe taking it all as cash would have been a good.
Yeah, that's right. Just be careful if you buy script.
Yeah.
Like you're talking to a guy here who's done everything wrong and is a slow learner when it comes to commercial stuff.
But, isn't that the way though, Mike? I mean, and I say this coming from the position of being a business owner myself. I think, business owners who are able to get the most ultimately, maybe even satisfaction, fulfillment. I don't know. At the end of the day, you don't do that without making a hell of a lot of mistakes along the way. It's just part of business, isn't it? When they say fail fast.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. But what you've got to do is get hold of some positives.
Yeah, 100%.
In the process. That's what you've got to focus on. And it turns out that 3 years of non-compete was probably the best 3 years I had in developing my ability to read a balance sheet, to know what a P&L is really about.
Right.
And to be able to do a cash flow.
So it was like a financial masterclass for 3 years.
a financial boot camp for 3 years.
Okay, I like that. Okay. And you were, I guess, at that point then you were back into being a wage earner for those 3 years. And
correct, you don't, and also you don't have the authority, even though you're MD, you don't have the authority, the same authority you had when you were a sole trader, where you could please yourself what you do, really.
Yeah. There's this saying, Mike, and I'm sure you've probably heard the saying, but once you've run your own business for, I can't remember, 5 years, 10 years, something like that, you're effectively almost unemployable because, it's so hard to march to someone else's tune. But you did that. So you managed to do it for 3 years. And it's one of the things that I talk to our clients about. And I think it's important to be aware of if you're entering into an earn-out period where you're required to keep turning up in order to extract that extra value out of the sale. It's just important to be aware from the beginning that the reality of it might be different to how it seems it might be in your head, which is not to say not to do it, but it's just important to go in eyes wide open, I guess.
Absolutely. Hindsight is a wonderful thing.
Isn't it just? Yes, absolutely.
But it's only wonderful if you learn from it.
That's absolutely true. You're so true, Mike.
But in that 3 years, I was always yearning to have my own business.
Yeah, again.
And there were certain elements of the business in Australia that weren't performing to the satisfaction of the Singaporeans.
Right.
And I distinctly remember being in Singapore for a board meeting and the MD up there saying to me, well, look, you sold me a pup in this business. And I said, I'll buy it back.
Oh, wow. And what happened?
I bought it back.
Oh, my goodness. For less than what you received?
A lot less.
Oh, my goodness.
I bought the parts that I knew I could do something with in the future, as opposed to do the similar things I did in the past.
Oh, that is amazing. I love that. What a great story. And so that was, did you say that was 3 years after the sale?
That was 1999, just on the cusp of the .com bit. And we had this department which used to go around and monitor electrical machines.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided that if I got hold of that, we'd put that technology on the web in those early days.
The World Wide Web back in 1999.
That's exactly right. It was a hype.
Yeah.
It was a hype, and it sounded good, and it really got everyone excited, and there were lots of VCs around. There was cash flowing for the ideas, and so we set up a company and started a journey to develop a web-based machine management system for remote sites, maybe for remote mining sites and so on.
I love that.
And the original thing is that we'd set an online community up where we'd bring the vendors who provided the service and customers together. But back there was so much suspicion around what the web was.
Really?
And that we didn't get buy-in.
Right. You were too early. You're ahead of your time, clearly, Mike.
Well, and the customers weren't quite ready to let you across their firewall into their business.
Mm.
So we had to wind that idea back, and we set up a traditional high-value consulting company around it, because we couldn't get those other... there were early adopters out there, but the early majority weren't moving for us.
Yeah, right.
But we did get a VC.
Right. Well, that's it for this episode of the Deal Room podcast. We hope you're now primed for your next deal with these pointers and have enjoyed these fascinating insights. Now, if you'd like more information about this topic, then head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com, where you'll be able to download a transcript of this episode, as well as access any contact details and any other additional information we referred to in today's podcast. Now, if you'd like to get in contact with our guests today and the services they offer, you can go ahead and check out our show notes for a link right through to them and their details. You can also book in directly with our legal legals at Aspect Legal if you'd like to soundboard your next steps, discuss a legal question, or find out more how we can assist, whether that's with buying or selling a business, or perhaps somewhere in between. Now, don't forget to subscribe to the Deal Room podcast on your favourite podcast player to get notifications whenever a new episode is out. We'd also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and rating if you're already one of our subscribers, or even if you're listening to this podcast for the very first time. Every review helps our team produce valuable content for you. Well, thanks again for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna Oakey and the Deal Room podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time. Aspect Legal has a number of great services that help businesses prepare for a sale or acquisition, to help them prepare in advance and to get transaction ready. We've also got a range of services to help guide businesses through the sale and acquisitions process. We work with clients both big and small and have different types of services depending on size and complexity. We provide a free consultation to discuss your proposed sale or acquisition. So see our show notes on how to book a time to speak with us, or head over to our website at aspectlegal.com.au.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment. Thanks for listening to the Deal Room podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.